I'd like to share with you some well-advertised psychology tricks that are supposed to do miracles in job interviews. The first one would be the mirroring approach. In other words, the advice is that if you mirror your interviewer's style, you will be far more likely to be perceived as a likable candidate and to be more relatable with respect to your interviewer. Now, what happens here in actual job interviews is that whenever you try to mirror your interviewer, you are assuming that the interviewer is acting as a winning candidate. Now, in my experience, not all interviewers will be highly energetic and, enthusiastic about doing the interview with you. And oftentimes, those interviewers might even look and be disengaged in the conversation, in which scenario I would wonder how your approach should look like during the job interview. Similarly, on the mirroring approach, if your interviewer speaks slowly, too slowly, and you are a native New Yorker, for instance, I doubt that speaking too slowly would bring any benefit because you would change the way you communicate to an unnatural communication style, which, might make them a little bit more suspicious about on whether you are who you say you are. So the mirroring technique, I believe, is dangerous business, and it's more likely to attract suspicion rather than confidence in you as a candidate. The next thing I like to talk about here would be to mirror the language of the job description. On the reasoning that, hey, if the job description paints the perfect candidate, I might as well speak as the perfect candidate during a job interview. There's one small problem with this approach, and over 10 years ago, I used to run an applicant tracking system, and I know how those job descriptions come alive. I know that most of the time those job descriptions are a clone of another job description which used to work like 5 years ago. Because, writing a new job description is quite complicated and intense, nobody will spend the time to craft job descriptions for the ideal candidate. And one more thing here, why would they share how the ideal candidate looks like in job interviews? Because if they would share what they're actually looking for in an ideal candidate, everyone would prepare just that. Right? So mirroring the language in the job description is, again, not to your advantage, simply because the job descriptions are nothing more than marketing manifestos, especially nowadays in the age of AI. The next technique I like to demystify here would be on the reasoning that if you manage to turn your interviewer into your friends like friends, and they like to hire their friends. You see, there's a little bit of truth to that if they like you, if they feel, there's a bit, you speak their language, so to speak, and if you feel like you are on the same lines with them, yes, you are more likely to receive a favorable recommendation. But the approach of befriending the interviewer can be quite tricky, and some of the more common approaches would be using we language. We did this, we achieved this successfully, on the reasoning that if you show as a team player, then your interviewer would interpret you more likely as a friend. Now, in a company such as Amazon, they screen specifically I versus we, and whenever you say we, they will become suspicious that you didn't fully own the decision you're talking about. In many other places, whenever you say we, might come across as if, hey, this person is a bit suspicious with respect to owning what they say they did. Furthermore, another technique to befriend, so to speak, your interviewer would be in questions for them and to ask them easy questions such as, what do you enjoy the most about working here? And these sort of things, questions they will enjoy answering. Now, in reality, I can tell you that many interviewers, especially interviewers that are seriously interested in screening you, which is often the case with FAANG companies, would appreciate if you ask them smart questions. So if you ask them a question they would enjoy answering, a very easy, generic type of question, you will not score any extra points there. Again, so befriending them doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And the most dangerous approach of all to befriend an interviewer would be to get on a personal level. And in my experience, this never ends well. Whenever you get personally job interviewed, that's usually a very subtle trap, and oftentimes the end of your interview without even you knowing it. So befriending your interviewer, again, it's dangerous business with a high-performing company. Another technique I'd like to share with you here would be, again, on the reasoning that you would want to picture yourself as one of theirs. You would want to talk about how many people you know in the company. And I've recently heard someone advising you that to drop as many names as possible, even if you only know those people from LinkedIn, on the reasoning that the more names you drop, the more likely you're going to show as one of them. Personally, I don't think this is great interviewing advice. I don't think you should be dropping names like crazy, especially interviews with FAANGs. Of course, if you know one or two people there, that's fine if you pitch them, but subtly. But I believe this could easily trigger them the wrong way, that you try to impress them simply because you know people there. And FAANGs are the types of company who can afford hiring high-performing talent, right? So they would prefer hiring a high performer rather than someone who knows every other person in the team, right? Maybe another one I'd like to talk about here would be the as-if principle. So the idea would be for you to interview as if you already got the job. And this would be a motivation technique. You would want to dress and act as if you already got the job. Now, in my experience, what happens with these type of approaches, which are quite common in my experience, if you dress as if you already got the job, you picture yourself as a highly polished individual, you would buy an HD webcam, you would focus on your sound quality, on your background and whatnot. You would try to, to make a strong impression during the job interview. Furthermore, when you act as if you already got the job, you might come across as slightly overconfident for the job that you're applying for. Now, it's no problem if you show only overconfident, but there's also the risk. You might come across even as slightly arrogant in this situation, so you'd want to pay particular attention to. But the key point I wanted to tell you here, in my experience, again, statistically speaking, the candidates whom I had and who worried a lot about their picture quality, their background quality, are at least 5 times less likely to get a favorable outcome in these job interviews, simply because they would over-focus on cosmetics. And I would just like to end up with another impression-based hiring approach that I believe also is a bit oversold, especially for nowadays interviews. That is, to try to impress them within the first 30 seconds of the conversation. And basically, this would be, giving a great elevator pitch, or, why this company, or making a strong impression in the beginning. Now, would I recommend that you make a strong impression in the beginning? Of course I would. Yes, I believe that's it's always to your advantage. Ideally, you should make a strong impression throughout your job interview. What happens here is you must understand a few elements here. No high-performing company or FAANG will hire you because you have a great elevator pitch. That doesn't happen. It doesn't work this way. Furthermore, in my experience, it's quite enjoyable that you prepare your elevator pitch when compared to other stuff, right? So I've seen candidates plenty of times preparing 2 or 3 days only to make that first impression a great one, which I don't believe is the best employment of your time. And there's another thing you must keep in mind here, that your energy levels. Okay, so let's say, yes, you perform extremely well within the first 5 minutes of your job interview. The challenge is that you must maintain that level of energy throughout your 1-hour interview, or if you're preparing for 5 or 6 interview rounds in the same day. Again, you must maintain that level of performance, which in my experience is also rarely the case. So long story short, it's a good idea to make a strong impression. Yes, and the other thing I wanted to tell you here with respect to impression. Many candidates interpret impression, making a strong impression, as making things up a little bit here and there in the age of AI. And what I can tell you from experience is this is the easiest way for an interviewer to disqualify you from a job interview even before the interview actually begins. So I highly believe that this advice of trying to impress in these job interviews is advice that only worked, or worked it would be an overstatement, but might have worked before AI became a thing, because nowadays, in the age of AI, this is an assumption that if you use AI to prepare your job interview, it will automatically advise you to bluff. And what happens here is that any skilled interviewer, especially with FAANG companies, will scan. This is the first thing they will scan in a job interview. And not everyone does these interviews in FAANGs. Not all interviewers will do their job because they enjoy interviewing other candidates. It might be as simple as, hey, they want to interview as for the shortest amount of time possible until they make a conclusion. Hey, if you're bluffing the first 30 seconds, you made their job easier, and that's it, right? So it couldn't be as simple as that. So I just wanted to bring this perspective. But in my experience of coaching candidates, helping candidates for over 8 years with jobs in FAANG companies, I can confidently tell you that psychology tricks work at best for screening rounds, but are highly inefficient approach to prepare for serious final interviews and to ultimately land job offers. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.